Dusty squinted against the driving rain. His worn poncho offered little protection as the wind howled across the plains. He urged his horse, a sturdy Appaloosa named Pepper, forward, the mud sucking at the animal's hooves with each step. The sky was a bruised purple, promising no relief from the downpour anytime soon. He'd been riding for days, heading towards the promise of work in a distant town. Dusty wasn't one for idle chatter or grand plans. He simply went where the wind and opportunity took him. He was a man weathered by sun and hardship, his face etched with the stories of a life lived outdoors. Rounding a bend in the trail, he saw it, a wagon, its wheels sunk deep into the mire. The mud was thick and brown, clinging to the wagon's sides like a hungry beast. The horses that likely pulled the wagon were nowhere to be seen. Whoever was traveling in it was stranded, and in this weather, that could be a death sentence. Dusty knew he couldn't just ride by. He pulled Pepper to a halt, the horse snorting and shaking its head, clearly unhappy about the prospect of stopping in the storm. Dusty patted Pepper's neck reassuringly. "Easy, girl," he murmured. "Someone needs our help." He dismounted, his boots sinking ankle-deep in the mud. The real work was about to begin. The wind howled, nearly swallowing the sound, but Dusty heard it, a faint, desperate cry cutting through the storm's fury. It was a woman's voice, filled with panic and fear. "Help! Please, someone help me." Dusty's brow furrowed. He moved closer to the wagon, the mud squelching beneath his boots. "Hello," he shouted, cupping his hand around his mouth. "I'm here. Can you hear me?" The cries intensified, laced with a rising note of hysteria. "We're stuck. The wagon's sinking. Please help us." "I'm going to get you out," Dusty yelled back, his voice strained against the wind. He circled the wagon, assessing the situation. The mud was thick and treacherous, reaching almost to the axles. The wagon was listing precariously to one side, threatening to topple over completely. Time was of the essence. He tried a wagon door, but it was jammed shut, likely due to the pressure of the mud. He glanced up at the canvas covering the wagon. It was ripped in several places, offering little protection from the elements. He needed to act fast. The woman's cries were becoming more frantic, punctuated by sobs. He could hear the distinct sound of fear, a sound that always spurred him to action. He knew he had to get her out of there, and he had to do it quickly. The storm wasn't letting up, and the mud was only getting deeper. Dusty didn't waste any time searching for tools he didn't have. He was a man of action, not words. He dropped to his knees beside the wagon wheel, the cold mud seeping through his already soaked trousers. Without hesitation, he began to dig. His bare hands plunged into the thick, clinging mud. It was cold and heavy, resisting his efforts with a stubborn tenacity. He clawed at it, scooping out handful after handful, tossing it aside. The mud splattered his face and clothes, but he didn't stop. He dug with a fierce determination, driven by the woman's desperate cries and the urgency of the situation. The sharp edges of rocks and debris hidden within the mud scraped against his skin, but he ignored the pain. His hands were soon red and raw, but he kept digging. He knew that every handful of mud he removed brought him closer to freeing the wagon and saving the woman inside. He worked in silence, grunting with effort, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The rain continued to fall, washing the mud from his face, but doing little to ease the discomfort. He focused on the task at hand, his mind shutting out everything but the need to dig, to free the wagon, to save the woman. He was a force of nature himself, battling the elements with his bare hands, driven by a simple sense of right and wrong. He wouldn't quit until she was safe. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Dusty felt the wheel begin to loosen. He redoubled his efforts, digging with renewed vigor. With a final heave, the wheel broke free from the mud's grasp. He quickly moved to the other side of the wagon and repeated the process until both wheels were clear. He tried the door again, and this time it creaked open with a groan. Inside, huddled beneath a tattered blanket, was a young woman. She was covered in mud from head to toe, her face pale and streaked with tears, but her eyes were wide and filled with a mixture of fear and relief. "Are you all right?" Dusty asked, his voice hoarse. She nodded weakly, her teeth chattering. I think so. Thank you," she whispered. Thank you so much. Dusty reached into the wagon and gently helped her out. Her legs were shaky, and she stumbled slightly as she stepped into the mud. He steadied her, his strong hands supporting her weight. Easy now, he said softly. Just take it slow. He led her away from the wagon, towards Pepper, who watched them with curious eyes. Despite her ordeal, Dusty could see that she was a beautiful woman, even covered in mud. He couldn't have known her name was Sarah, or that his life was about to change forever. All he knew was that he had saved her, and that was enough. She was safe and unharmed, and that was all that mattered. Sarah shivered, the rain still falling steadily. She looked at Dusty, her eyes filled with gratitude. I don't know how to thank you, she said, her voice still trembling. You saved my life. She reached into a small, mud-splattered pouch tied to her waist. I don't have much, but please take this. She pulled out a handful of coins, their surfaces dull with grime. Dusty shook his head, his gaze steady. I don't need your money, he said, his voice firm but gentle. Sarah frowned. But you did so much. I insist. I just did what was right, Dusty replied, avoiding her outstretched hand. You needed help, and I helped you. That's all there is to it. He glanced at her wagon. Can you get it moving now? Sarah looked back at the wagon, then back at Dusty. I think so. The mud's still pretty thick, but I can try. I'll help you hitch up your horses, Dusty offered. Then you should be able to make it to town. It's not too far from here. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. All right. Thank you. Again. She paused. I wish I knew your name. Dusty, he replied simply. Thank you, Dusty, she said, her voice sincere. I won't forget what you did for me. He just nodded, already moving towards the wagon, ready to help her get back on her way. He didn't need payment or praise. Knowing he'd done the right thing was reward enough. With the horses hitched and the wagon finally moving, albeit slowly, Dusty watched Sarah disappear down the muddy trail. He gave Pepper a gentle nudge, and they turned in the opposite direction, resuming their journey. The rain had begun to lighten, and a sliver of sun peeked through the clouds. Dusty didn't give the encounter a second thought. He'd helped someone in need, and now he was moving on. It was a simple transaction in his mind, a brief interruption in the long, solitary road ahead. He didn't know Sarah's last name, didn't know where she was headed, and certainly didn't know that she was the sheriff's daughter. He just knew she was safe, and that was enough. He rode in silence, the rhythmic clop of Pepper's hooves the only sound accompanying him. He thought about the work he hoped to find in the next town, the warm meal he planned to eat, the dry bed he longed to sleep in. His mind was focused on the practicalities of survival, on the simple necessities of life. The encounter with Sarah faded into the background, becoming just another memory in a life filled with them. He had no idea that Sarah would be telling her father about him, or that the sheriff would be searching for the kind stranger who had saved his daughter's life. Dusty was simply riding towards his future, completely unaware that his past was about to catch up with him in a very unexpected way. The setting sun cast long shadows across the plains, painting the landscape in hues of orange and purple, a silent promise of a new day to come. The town of Harmony Creek was small, nestled in a valley surrounded by rolling hills. The buildings were simple but sturdy, built to withstand the harsh realities of the West. As Sarah's wagon lumbered into town, covered in mud and looking worse for wear, heads turned. People stopped what they were doing and stared, their faces etched with concern. Sheriff Brody, a tall, imposing figure with a weathered face and kind eyes, stood on the porch of his office, surveying the scene. He recognized the wagon immediately, and his heart leaped into his throat. He'd been worried sick ever since Sarah had left that morning. The storm had been fierce, and he'd feared the worst. He rushed toward the wagon as it pulled to a stop in front of the general store. Sarah climbed down, her face still pale, but her eyes shining with relief. Sheriff Brody enveloped her in a bear hug, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah, thank God you're safe, he exclaimed, holding her tightly. What happened? Are you hurt? Sarah hugged him back, burying her face in his shoulder. I'm all right, Papa, she said, her voice muffled. Just shaken up. The wagon got stuck in the mud and... She paused, a grateful look on her face. A man helped me. He saved me. Sheriff Brody stepped back, his gaze searching her face. A man? What man? Tell me everything. He was immensely relieved to see her safe, but now a new feeling began to stir within him. Gratitude towards the stranger who had rescued his daughter. He needed to find him and thank him properly. He also needed to know exactly what happened out there in the storm. Inside the sheriff's office, Sarah recounted her ordeal to her father. She described the storm, the wagon sinking deeper and deeper into the mud, and her growing fear. Then she spoke of Dusty. He just appeared. Papa, she said, her voice filled with admiration. Out of nowhere. He didn't say much, just started digging with his bare hands. The mud was so thick, I don't know how he did it. Sheriff Brody listened intently, his brow furrowed with concern. What did he look like, this man? He was tall, with a weathered face and kind eyes, Sarah replied. He had a worn poncho and a wide-brimmed hat that hid most of his hair. His hands were calloused and strong. She paused, trying to recall every detail. He rode a sturdy Appaloosa, mostly white with dark spots. A beautiful horse. Did he give you his name? Sheriff Brody asked. Just Dusty, Sarah said. He didn't want any reward. Just helped me, because it was the right thing to do. She smiled softly. He was a good man, Papa. A really good man. Sheriff Brody nodded, a determined look on his face. We need to find him, Sarah. I need to thank him properly. A man like that deserves our gratitude. He stood up and grabbed his hat. I'll ask around, see if anyone's seen him. An Appaloosa like that should be easy to spot. He knew he had to find this Dusty, not just to thank him, but to understand the kind of man who would help someone in need without expecting anything in return. Those kinds of men were rare and worth knowing. Sheriff Brody was known throughout Harmony Creek and the surrounding territory as a stern but fair man. He upheld the law with unwavering resolve, but he also possessed a deep sense of justice and compassion. He wasn't one for grand gestures or flowery speeches, but his actions always spoke louder than words. The fact that a stranger had risked his own safety to help his daughter touched him deeply. He knew the dangers of traveling alone in the West, especially during a storm like the one Sarah had endured. Dusty could have easily ridden past, minding his own business, but he hadn't. He'd stopped, he'd helped, and he'd refused any reward. That kind of selflessness was rare, and Sheriff Brody felt compelled to acknowledge it in a meaningful way. He wasn't just going to offer a simple thank you and send Dusty on his way. He wanted to offer him something substantial, something that would truly show his appreciation. Perhaps a job, a warm meal, a place to stay for a while. He knew the value of hard work and honest labor, and he suspected that Dusty was a man who embodied those qualities. He also wanted to understand Dusty's motives. What drove a man to act so selflessly? What kind of life had he lived? Sheriff Brody was a keen judge of character, and he sensed that there was more to Dusty than met the eye. He was determined to find out more, to offer his gratitude, and to perhaps even forge a lasting friendship with this remarkable stranger. He saddled his horse, a sturdy bay named Justice, and prepared to ride out, his mind filled with thoughts of the man they called Dusty. The town of Redemption was a dusty, bustling place, a far cry from the peaceful valley of Harmony Creek. Saloons lined the main street, their swinging doors constantly in motion, and the air was thick with the smell of whiskey and stale tobacco. Wagons and horses jostled for space, and the sounds of laughter, shouting, and the occasional gunshot filled the air. Dusty rode into Redemption, his eyes scanning the scene. He dismounted in front of the general store and tied Pepper to the hitching post. The town was rough around the edges, but offered the promise of work and a warm meal, both of which were high on his list of priorities. He entered the general store, its shelves lined with everything from canned goods to mining tools. He purchased a few basic supplies, coffee, beans, and some jerky, then asked the storekeeper about work. Work's scarce these days, the storekeeper said, scratching his chin, but the saloon's always looking for someone to clean up. Or maybe the livery stable needs a hand. Dusty thanked him and left the store, his stomach rumbling. He decided to try the saloon first. The aroma of cooking meat wafted from within, and the thought of a hot meal was too tempting to resist. He pushed open the swinging doors and stepped inside, the noise and the smoky atmosphere hitting him like a wall. He was hoping for a job, and more importantly, a hot plate of something substantial. He was also hoping to avoid any trouble. But in a town like Redemption, trouble often found you whether you were looking for it or not. Dusty approached the bar and ordered a whiskey. As he waited, he noticed a young boy, no older than 10, being harassed by a burly man with a cruel sneer. The man was much larger than the boy and was clearly enjoying the power he held. The man snatched the boy's hat and tossed it to the floor, laughing as the boy scrambled to retrieve it. "Leave him alone," Dusty said, his voice low but firm. The bully turned, his eyes narrowing. "Mind your own business, old man," he growled. "He's not bothering anyone," Dusty replied, his gaze unwavering. "Just leave him be." The bully stepped closer, his fists clenching. "You calling me out?" Dusty sighed. He didn't want trouble, but he couldn't stand to see someone picking on a child. "I'm just asking you to leave the boy alone." The bully lunged, throwing a punch. Dusty easily sidestepped the blow and grabbed the man's arm, twisting it behind his back. The bully yelped in pain. "I don't want to hurt you," Dusty said, his voice still calm. "Just walk away." The bully, realizing he was outmatched, reluctantly agreed. Dusty released him, and the bully, nursing his arm, slunk away into the crowd. The young boy looked up at Dusty, his eyes wide with gratitude. "Thank you, mister," he whispered. Dusty just nodded. He hadn't been looking for a fight, but he couldn't stand idly by while someone was being bullied. He defended the boy, and now he hoped that was the end of it. He didn't know that this small act of kindness would have far-reaching consequences, setting in motion a chain of events that would change his life forever. Humiliated and with his arm throbbing, the bully, whose name was Jake, retreated to a dark corner of the saloon. He nursed his bruised ego and glared at Dusty, his mind churning with resentment. He couldn't let this go. He had to get even. As he sat there, his gaze lingered on Pepper, standing patiently outside the saloon. Something about the horse seemed familiar. He squinted, trying to recall where he'd seen it before. It hit him. He'd overheard Sheriff Brody asking about a man riding in Appaloosa, a man who had helped his daughter. The description Sarah had given, tall, weathered, kind eyes, matched the man who had just humiliated him perfectly. A slow grin spread across Jake's face. This was better than revenge. This was an opportunity. He could turn Dusty over to the sheriff and earn himself some favor, maybe even some reward money. It was the perfect way to salvage his pride and get back at the man who had dared to stand up to him. Without another word, Jake stumbled out of the saloon, his arms still aching. He mounted his horse and spurred it into a gallop, heading toward Harmony Creek. He knew where Sheriff Brody would be, and he couldn't wait to deliver the news. He had found a man the sheriff was looking for, and he was going to be the hero of the hour. Little did he know, his actions would set in motion a series of events that would have consequences for everyone involved. Sheriff Brody arrived in Redemption with a sense of purpose. He'd ridden hard, Justice's hooves kicking up dust as they covered the miles between Harmony Creek and the neighboring town. Jake's breathless account had confirmed his suspicions. The man who had saved Sarah was indeed in Redemption. He rode slowly down Main Street, his eyes scanning the faces of the townsfolk. He was looking for a tall man, weathered and strong, with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. But more importantly, he was looking for an Appaloosa. He stopped in front of the saloon, the swinging doors momentarily obscuring his view. He dismounted Justice and tied him to the hitching post, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. He wasn't expecting trouble, but he was always prepared for it. He pushed open the saloon doors, the noise and smoke washing over him. The room fell silent as all eyes turned towards him. Sheriff Brody was a figure of authority, and his presence commanded respect. He surveyed the room, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the patrons. He saw gamblers, drunks, and cowboys, but he didn't see Dusty. He did, however, see the Appaloosa standing patiently outside. His heart quickened. He was close. He approached the barkeep, a burly man with a handlebar mustache. "I'm looking for a man," Sheriff Brody said, his voice calm but firm. "Tall, weathered, rides an Appaloosa. Have you seen him?" The barkeep nodded toward the table in the corner. He's over there, Sheriff. Just had a bit of a dust-up with Jake. Brody's eyes followed the barkeep's nod. Dusty was here. Sheriff Brody followed the barkeep's gaze and spotted Jake, still nursing his arm and glaring at a man sitting alone at a table in the corner. Jake saw the sheriff looking at him and nodded his head subtly towards Dusty, a smug look on his face. Sheriff Brody's eyes narrowed as he took in Dusty's appearance. He matched Sarah's description perfectly, tall, weathered, with kind eyes that held a hint of weariness. He approached Dusty cautiously, his hand instinctively moving to the handle of his revolver. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he had to be prepared for anything. He stopped a few feet from Dusty's table, his presence casting a long shadow over the man. He slowly drew his revolver, the click of the hammer echoing in the suddenly silent saloon. But his expression was one of confusion, not aggression. He wasn't sure why he was drawing his gun on a man who had saved his daughter's life. "Dusty," he asked, his voice low and cautious. Dusty looked up, his eyes meeting the sheriff's. He didn't seem surprised, but there was a flicker of wariness in his gaze. He slowly placed his hands on the table, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He knew this wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. He just didn't know why. The other patrons watched with bated breath, unsure of what was about to unfold. The tension in the saloon was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sheriff Brody's confusion deepened, as he couldn't reconcile the image of a hero with the need for caution. Dusty's mind raced. He hadn't broken any laws, hadn't stolen anything, hadn't even been involved in a serious fight. So why was the sheriff of this town, or any town for that matter, pointing a gun at him? He kept his hands on the table, his eyes fixed on Sheriff Brody's. He could see the confusion in the sheriff's expression, but that didn't make the situation any less dangerous. He knew that in a place like Redemption, a misunderstanding could quickly turn deadly. "Sheriff," Dusty said, his voice calm and even, "I'm not looking for any trouble. I just came here looking for work." "What's your name?" Sheriff Brody asked, his voice still cautious. "Dusty," he replied. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Dusty what?" "Just Dusty," he said. He wasn't about to give the sheriff any more information than he had to. He had a feeling that whatever was going on, it wasn't good. He glanced around the saloon, noticing the curious and apprehensive faces of the other patrons. He knew they were all waiting to see what would happen next, ready to scatter if things turned violent. He hoped it wouldn't come to that, but he was prepared to defend himself if necessary. He just wished he knew what he was defending himself against. He studied the sheriff's face again, searching for any clue as to what he had done to warrant this confrontation. The silence stretched, heavy and uncertain. Sheriff Brody lowered his gun slightly, the confusion on his face becoming more pronounced. He holstered the weapon, but his eyes remained fixed on Dusty. The silence in the saloon was still heavy, the tension palpable. "Dusty," Sheriff Brody said, his voice softening. "My name is Brody, Sheriff Brody, and Sarah is my daughter." Dusty's eyes widened slightly. He finally understood. "The woman in the wagon," he said, his voice low. "Yes," Brody replied. "She told me about what happened, about how you helped her. She said you dug her out of the mud with your bare hands." He paused, a hint of emotion creeping into his voice. "She's my whole world, Dusty, and you saved her life." He stepped closer to the table, extending his hand. "I owe you a debt I can never repay. Thank you, Dusty. Thank you for saving my daughter." Dusty looked at the sheriff's outstretched hand, then back at his face. He could see the sincerity in Brody's eyes, the genuine gratitude that shone through his stern exterior. He slowly reached out and shook the sheriff's hand, his grip firm but respectful. "I just did what anyone would have done," Dusty said, his voice humble. "Not everyone would have," Sheriff Brody replied, his gaze unwavering. "Not everyone is as kind and selfless as you are." The tension in the saloon began to dissipate, replaced by a murmur of understanding. The sheriff wasn't there to arrest Dusty. He was there to thank him. News of Dusty's heroic act spread like wildfire through Redemption. The townsfolk, eager to show their appreciation, decided to throw a celebration in his honor. The saloon was decorated with colorful streamers, and a makeshift stage was set up in the middle of the street. A banner proclaiming, "Welcome Dusty, our hero," was strung across the entrance. Dusty, however, felt deeply uncomfortable with all the attention. He was a simple man, not used to being the center of admiration. He'd only done what he thought was right, and he didn't understand why everyone was making such a fuss about it. Sheriff Brody tried to reassure him. "They just want to show you how grateful they are, Dusty," he said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Just try to enjoy it." But Dusty couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong there. He stood awkwardly on the stage as the town mayor gave a long-winded speech praising his bravery and selflessness. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, wishing he could disappear. People kept coming up to him, offering handshakes and words of thanks. He tried to smile and nod politely, but he felt like an imposter. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man who had helped someone in need. He longed for the solitude of the open plains, the quiet companionship of Pepper, and the anonymity of being just another face in the crowd. The cheers and applause felt like a weight on his shoulders, a burden he didn't know how to bear. He glanced longingly at Pepper, tied to a nearby post, wishing he could just ride away. After the uncomfortable celebration, Dusty found himself drawn to Harmony Creek. He took up Sheriff Brody's offer of a temporary job helping out around the town, mostly tending to the horses and doing odd jobs. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and it kept him busy. He also found himself spending more and more time with Sarah. They would take long walks together in the hills surrounding Harmony Creek, talking about their lives, their hopes, and their dreams. They discovered a shared love of nature, a deep respect for hard work, and a quiet understanding of each other's souls. Sarah was drawn to Dusty's quiet strength and his unwavering kindness. She admired his humility and his willingness to help others, even when it meant putting himself at risk. She saw in him a genuine goodness that she had rarely encountered before. Dusty, in turn, was captivated by Sarah's gentle spirit and her unwavering optimism. He appreciated her intelligence and her sense of humor, and he found himself drawn to her inner beauty. He had never met a woman like her before, and he found himself falling in love. Their connection was subtle, unspoken, but undeniable. They found solace in each other's company, a sense of belonging that neither of them had experienced before. They were two kindred spirits, drawn together by fate, their lives forever intertwined by a single act of kindness in the midst of a raging storm. The quiet moments they shared became more precious than any celebration or grand gesture. They built a foundation on mutual respect and admiration, unaware of the challenges that lay ahead. The tranquility of Harmony Creek was shattered by the arrival of a new threat. Whispers began to circulate about the notorious Blackwood Gang, a ruthless group of outlaws known for their daring stagecoach robberies and their brutal treatment of anyone who stood in their way. They had been terrorizing the surrounding territories for months, and now it seemed their sights were set on Harmony Creek. The gang was led by a cold-blooded killer named Jed Blackwood, a man with a reputation for violence and a complete disregard for the law. He was rumored to have a network of informants throughout the region, feeding him information about valuable shipments and vulnerable towns. Sheriff Brody received a tip from a reliable source that the Blackwood Gang was planning to rob the stagecoach that was due to arrive in Harmony Creek in a few days, carrying a large sum of money from the local bank. He knew he had to do something to protect his town and its citizens. He gathered the townsfolk and explained the situation, urging them to prepare for the worst. He also confided in Dusty, seeking his advice and assistance. He knew that Dusty had a keen sense of danger and a natural talent for fighting. He would need all the help he could get to defend Harmony Creek from the Blackwood Gang. The peaceful haven was about to become a battleground. The threat loomed, casting a dark shadow over the budding romance between Dusty and Sarah and testing the strength of their newfound community. Sheriff Brody, knowing the Blackwood Gang would strike soon, began to formulate a plan. He knew he couldn't face them alone. He needed all the help he could get. He turned to Dusty, knowing the lone traveler possessed a unique set of skills and a calm demeanor that would be invaluable in the coming fight. Together, they assessed the town's defenses, identifying vulnerable points and strategizing how to best protect the town and its citizens. They decided to fortify the main street, using wagons and barrels to create barricades. They also enlisted the help of the townsfolk, organizing them into a makeshift militia. Dusty, despite his discomfort with attention, stepped up and took on a leadership role, teaching the townsfolk basic shooting skills and tactics. He showed them how to use cover, how to reload quickly, and how to work together as a team. His quiet confidence and practical knowledge inspired them, giving them the courage to face the Blackwood Gang. Sheriff Brody focused on gathering intelligence, trying to determine the gang's exact plan of attack. He sent out scouts to patrol the surrounding area, keeping a close watch for any sign of the outlaws. He also made sure that Sarah was safe, entrusting her to the care of a trusted friend and urging her to stay hidden. As the day of the stagecoach arrival drew near, the atmosphere in Harmony Creek became increasingly tense. The townsfolk were nervous, but they were also determined to defend their home. They were ready to stand together against the Blackwood Gang, united by a shared sense of purpose and an unwavering belief in their ability to protect their town. The stage was set for a showdown. The stagecoach rumbled into Harmony Creek, kicking up dust as it approached the town. The driver, a nervous man named Hank, cracked his whip, urging the horses forward. He knew that the Blackwood Gang was out there, and he prayed that they would make it safely to their destination. Suddenly, a volley of gunfire erupted from the surrounding hills. The Blackwood Gang had arrived. The townsfolk, prepared for the attack, quickly took their positions behind the barricades. Sheriff Brody and Dusty, leading the charge, returned fire, their shots ringing out through the town. A fierce gunfight erupted, the air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the deafening sound of gunfire. The Blackwood Gang, a ruthless and experienced group of outlaws, attacked with ferocity, determined to rob the stagecoach and take control of the town. The townsfolk, though outnumbered, fought bravely, inspired by Dusty's leadership and Sheriff Brody's unwavering courage. They used their newfound skills to their advantage, taking cover and firing with precision. The gunfight raged for what seemed like an eternity, the fate of Harmony Creek hanging in the balance. The stagecoach horses, panicked by the gunfire, reared and whinnied, threatening to bolt. The passengers huddled inside, praying for their safety. The scene was chaotic, a maelstrom of bullets and desperation. It was a fight for survival, a battle between good and evil, with the future of Harmony Creek hanging in the balance. The Blackwood Gang was relentless, but the people of Harmony Creek were equally determined to protect their home. Amidst the chaos of the gunfight, Dusty's primary concern was Sarah's safety. He knew she was hidden in the back of the general store, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she was in danger. He moved swiftly and strategically, taking down outlaws with deadly accuracy as he made his way towards the store. He reached the back of the store and found Sarah huddled in a corner, her face pale with fear. "You all right?" he asked, his voice urgent. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I am scared, Dusty." "I'm going to get you out of here," he said, grabbing her hand. "Stay close to me." He led her through the back exit of the store, using his body as a shield to protect her from the flying bullets. They made their way towards the sheriff's office, where they would be safer. As they moved, Dusty continued to fight, taking down outlaws with his quick reflexes and sharp shooting skills. He was a force to be reckoned with, a one-man army determined to protect the woman he loved and the town that had become his home. He also kept a close eye on Sheriff Brody, making sure he wasn't in too much danger. He knew that Brody was a skilled lawman, but he was also getting older, and the Blackwood Gang was a formidable foe. Dusty positioned himself to provide support, taking down any outlaws who got too close to the sheriff. Their combined efforts began to turn the tide of the battle, giving the townsfolk a renewed sense of hope. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the battlefield, the tide of the gunfight finally turned. The Blackwood Gang, depleted and demoralized, began to retreat, their dreams of robbing the stagecoach and taking control of Harmony Creek shattered. Jed Blackwood, the gang's ruthless leader, was among the last to fall, struck down by a bullet fired from Dusty's rifle. With Blackwood gone, the remaining outlaws scattered, disappearing into the surrounding hills. The gunfight was over. Harmony Creek had been saved. The townsfolk emerged from their hiding places, their faces etched with relief and exhaustion. They had survived the attack, thanks to the courage and skill of Sheriff Brody and, above all, Dusty. A cheer went up as they realized they had won. They gathered around Dusty, showering him with praise and gratitude. They hailed him as a hero, a savior, the man who had single-handedly saved their town from certain destruction. Dusty, once again, felt uncomfortable with the attention. He had only done what he thought was right, what anyone would have done in his position. But he couldn't deny the warmth he felt in his heart, the sense of belonging that he had never experienced before. He had found a home in Harmony Creek, and he had helped to protect it. The town was safe, the Blackwood gang was defeated, and Dusty was a hero. But this time, the feeling was different. This time, he felt like he deserved it. He wasn't just a lone traveler passing through. He was a part of this community, and he would do anything to protect it. The dust settled, both literally and figuratively, on Harmony Creek. The aftermath of the gunfight was a stark reminder of the violence they had faced, but it was also a testament to their resilience and their unwavering spirit. As the townsfolk began to rebuild, Dusty found himself at a crossroads. He had always been a wanderer, a lone wolf, content to drift from place to place, never putting down roots. But something had changed. He had found something in Harmony Creek that he had never found before, a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, a sense of home. He looked at Sarah, her eyes shining with gratitude and love, and he knew that he couldn't leave. He had found his place, his purpose, his family. He had dug her out of the mud, never knowing she was the sheriff's daughter. And in doing so, he had dug himself out of a life of solitude and into a future filled with love and belonging. He approached Sheriff Brody, his voice firm and resolute. "Sheriff," he said, "I've been thinking. I'd like to stay in Harmony Creek, if you'll have me." Sheriff Brody smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. "Dusty," he said, "you're more than welcome here. You're one of us now." Dusty nodded, a sense of peace washing over him. He had finally found his place in the world. He was no longer a lone traveler. He was a part of Harmony Creek, and he was home. He looked at Sarah and knew he'd made the right decision. His wandering days were over. With Dusty's decision to stay, Harmony Creek felt complete. The town had been tested, but had emerged stronger than ever, bound together by a shared sense of purpose and a renewed appreciation for the simple things in life. Dusty and Sarah's relationship deepened with each passing day. They spent their time exploring the surrounding hills, working together on various projects around the town, and simply enjoying each other's company. They found solace in their shared experiences, a quiet understanding that transcended words. Their love was built on a foundation of respect, gratitude, and a deep appreciation for each other's character. They had both faced hardship and adversity, and they had emerged stronger and more resilient as a result. They knew that life wouldn't always be easy, but they were confident that they could face any challenge together. As the seasons changed, their plans for the future began to take shape. They dreamed of building a small house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a garden filled with flowers and vegetables. They talked about starting a family, raising children who would inherit their values of kindness, honesty, and hard work. They knew that their life together would be filled with love, laughter, and a shared sense of purpose. They had found their happily ever after, not in a grand adventure or a life of fame and fortune, but in the simple beauty of a small town, a loving community, and a connection that would last a lifetime. They had dug themselves out of the mud and found something truly special, a love that would endure through any storm.